Hey there guys, alright, and today we are watching a video from Mark Felton Productions. It popped up on my recommended feed. It was one I have not yet watched, and you know what? It intrigued me. So today it's what we are going to watch. Churchill visits Hitler's bunker. Got anything else to add here? Let's dive right in. I love Mark Felton's freaking intro music.
With the surrender of Nazi Germany in early May 1945, Berlin found itself completely occupied by the Red Army, which had captured it following a very difficult and bloody battle. Hitler's bunker, located beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery, had been captured by the Soviets on the 2nd of May 1945. And if you've seen my series about the Soviet investigation into the death of Hitler, link in the end screen. The first weeks after Berlin's capture saw frenetic Soviet efforts to investigate the alleged deaths of Hitler and his wife Eva Braun on the 30th of April 1945 and their subsequent cremation and burial outside of the bunker's emergency exit. Soviet Schmierz and NKVD
Soviet Schmierz? What is that?
Intelligence officers sealed off the bunker from prying eyes, allowing few non-Soviet intelligence personnel access as they sought to find absolute proof of Hitler's death for a very skeptical Stalin in Moscow, and put to bed a
You know, you can't blame Stalin. I mean, there are a lot of times where Stalin's paranoia is a bit much, but in this regard, I think his paranoia is a bit valid.
rumor that Hitler had actually escaped justice. The Soviets, despite an agreement made with the Western Allied powers to divide Berlin into 4 occupation zones, deliberately sought to delay and frustrate attempts by the British, Americans, and French to drive to Berlin through Soviet-controlled Eastern Germany and take over their allotted occupation zones. And the first Western Allied troops actually arrived in Berlin on the 4th of July 1945, 2 months after the Red Army had captured the city. By that time, the first phase of the Cold War had broken out to some degree between West and East. Arriving Allied troops wanted to see the ruined Reich Chancellery, Hitler's official seat of power, and the Führer bunker, where he had dramatically died when Soviet forces were less than half a kilometer away. But the Soviets continued to resist admission, particularly to the bunker, which had deteriorated considerably since its capture. When the Red Army had captured the bunker, its pumps, ventilation, and lighting had all been operational, power coming from a U-boat engine. However, the power was then shut off, and Soviet troops made a horrendous mess searching the 2-story bunker for evidence. The rooms were looted or very thoroughly searched, which, coupled with the hasty abandonment of the complex by the SS on the night of the 1st to 2nd of May 1945, meant that it was in a terrible state. The SS had also set fire to some of the bunker's upper rooms, leaving them in a very poor state. Berlin has a very high water table, so
If they're what I want to understand is the mentality. Like, what's the point in burning all that stuff? Like, what kind of secret? Like, maybe identification. Some of y'all like going into hiding. I'm assuming. Um, but I don't know. Like, there's some stuff that I feel like they may have just like. What's the point in destroying some things when you've lost? I don't know. Like, the torched earth, scorched earth doesn't really make sense.
with pumps switched off, water began to seep into the lower bunker, where Hitler had died, leaving it with a few centimeters of dirty brown water in all of the rooms.
Yeah. Yes.
Closed up and unventilated, mold soon began to grow on the bunker's walls, the remaining furniture, and abandoned clothing. A dark, dingy, musty, and damp hole in the ground that bore little resemblance to how it looked when Hitler lived and worked in it during the last months of the war. Some Allied soldiers and war correspondents did manage to obtain access to the Führer bunker, normally by bribing Soviet sentries with cigarettes or alcohol, and many souvenirs were taken that survive today in museums or private collections. By the guttering light of cigarette lighters or handheld electric torches, journalists snapped photos of the dilapidated and waterlogged rooms. The Allied leaders were due to meet at the Sicilienhof Palace at Potsdam to determine the future course of the war against Japan and many of the issues concerning ravaged Europe, and the Soviets prepared to meet the two most important leaders who would arrive by plane at Tempelhof Airport on the 14th of July 1945. US President Harry S. Truman
Rah,
and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
rah.
Before
Well, he's looking
going to
old in that one.
Potsdam, the Soviets arranged whistle-stop tours of the battered sites of the fallen Nazi regime, in particular the Reich Chancellery and the Führerbunker. President Truman appeared rather disinterested in the sights he was shown, merely surveying the wrecked buildings from the comfort of his vehicle, but Churchill was a bit more adventurous. The President and the Prime Minister travelled with very large entourages, and in Churchill's inner group were his daughter, Mary Churchill, an officer in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, a host of other generals and brigadiers, and his personal physician, Lord Moran, not to mention Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. Churchill drove to the Brandenburg Gate, sitting in the front passenger seat of a Royal Military Police jeep. Churchill was in uniform, dressed in his uniform as Honorary Colonel of the 4th, 5th Cinque Ports Battalion, the Royal Sussex Regiment, a position he had assumed in 1941, his lightweight summer tunic adorned with his rows of medal ribbons awarded for his earlier campaigns as a professional army officer and war correspondent. During the visit, he was fairly lightly protected. Red Army soldiers controlled the streets, of course, and Churchill's group included military policemen, his police bodyguards, and members of his inner circle. But German civilians were not kept back, and the visit was unannounced, and soon a fair-sized crowd gathered to see the man the Nazis had told them was their dread enemy for 6 long years of war. Churchill recorded his own wariness at seeing German civilians as he dismounted from his jeep in front of the Reich Chancellery on Wilhelmstrasse. "When I got out of the car and walked about among them,"
Mark Belton doing a Churchill impression. I love it.
"except for one old man who shook his head disapprovingly, they all began to cheer. My hate died with their surrender, and I was much moved by their demonstrations, and also by their haggard looks and threadbare clothes. Then we entered the Chancellery, and for quite a long time walked through its shattered galleries and halls." It was a triumphant moment for Churchill, yet it appeared to give him no pleasure. The Allied bombing of Berlin and the subsequent street fighting during the battle for the city had reduced Hitler's grandiose Reich Chancellery to a ravaged ruin. Soviet looting had finished the job. Its once elegant rooms piled with rubbish and broken furniture, broken military equipment and ornaments. Churchill, supporting himself using a gold-topped cane, poked about, puffing on his ubiquitous cigar, gazing at the devastation. In Hitler's enormous office, 2 of its chandeliers lying crashed and broken on the floor, he gazed upon the Führer's upturned desk, shuffling through papers and iron crosses that carpeted the floor. Soviet guides kept up a running commentary as Churchill's group progressed through the giant rooms, but Churchill was largely silent. Next in the itinerary was Hitler's bunker, reached via a tunnel and then flights of steps from within the Reich Chancellery building. The way underground was lit by the dancing beams of electric torches held by the accompanying Red Army soldiers. The steps were wet and slippery, the atmosphere sultry and dingy. It was a hot day, and Churchill, hardly a fit man, began to feel tired, carefully navigating the slippery steps and detritus down to the upper bunker deep beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. He managed to get halfway down, but when he was told there were still 2 more long staircases to descend, he decided that he had seen enough.
Oh,
His daughter
damn.
and many of the party continued on to Hitler's final bolt hole, while Churchill was directed outside via the Führerbunker's emergency exit, the very set of steps that Hitler's corpse was carried up 2 months earlier to be cremated in the garden. Churchill staggered out through the open armoured door in the emergency exit's concrete bunker, unsteady on his feet, A Soviet sentry grabbed his elbow to steady him, and he was led to a battered and broken armchair placed outside the emergency exit to rest for a while. The chair, the Soviets told him, was Hitler's from his bunker study. Churchill mopped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief while chatting with members of his party and waiting for his daughter and the other members of his group to return from
That chair don't look stable.
below ground. And after a while they appeared, and he rose and walked the few paces to the pit where the Soviets said the bodies of Hitler and his wife had been buried after their cremation on the 30th of April 1945. Churchill gazed into the pit, poking with his stick at a couple of bullet-riddled jerry cans that held the petrol that had been used to burn Hitler, and then turned abruptly and walked away. Most of the rest of Churchill's stay in Berlin was taken up by the Potsdam Conference with Stalin and President Truman, and 10 days later he was out of office, after having lost the general election, replaced as Prime Minister by Clement Attlee, who took over at the talks. It is nonetheless interesting that after having led Britain and the Empire since 1940 through all the uncertainties and horrors of World War, one of his last acts as war leader was to have visited the site of his greatest enemy's ultimate defeat and death, completing the long journey from the defeat at Dunkirk 6 summers before. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
And that was Churchill's visit to the Hitler bunker. This was a good video. I wasn't really quite sure what to expect in this video. Didn't really learn anything. It was just, it was just a visit. I don't know what I was expecting. I mean, still a good video. It's still very informative. Is insightful would be one word for it. It actually told you quite a bit about Churchill and perhaps his emotions towards the end of the war here. All of which very interesting. But I have nothing else to say. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.